Guys, and welcome back for the second lesson within the Professional Diploma in Project Management. Today we're going to be talking about our introduction to the initiation phase. Before we get started, I just wanted to share quite a fun fact with you. And did you know that the International Space Station is currently valued at over $150 billion? Now this makes it one of the biggest mega projects on the planet, and I thought it would be quite a fun fact for all of you to hear. For any of you who may have forgotten, my name is Kate Savage and I'm an experienced college lecturer, and I will be walking you through this project management course. While I have all of your attention, I just wanted to go through some light housekeeping. Now remember that here at Shaw Academy, it's your class on your time. You can change your class date and time whenever it suits you, and you can also restart the course if you feel that you've lost your place, and you can start again fresh. One of my favorite things about the Shaw Academy experience is that you can access your lessons either through the app or through the website, making it convenient for you wherever you are and whatever lifestyle you lead. For any of you who have yet to interact with Morpheus, here's our artificial intelligence bot here at Shaw Academy, and he is here to answer your questions. You can chat with Morpheus throughout the lesson, and just remember to rate the responses so that we can improve upon them in the future. And any additional questions, you can email me at support@shawacademy.com, and I will generally get back to you within the next 48 hours. Just a quick recap on what we covered in Lesson 1. We spoke about defining projects, and we said that a project is a temporary endeavor with a unique goal. We also spoke about project sponsors, and this is a person or group who provides resources and support for the project, program, or portfolio, and is also responsible for enabling project success. We then moved on to talk about project stakeholders, and these are people who are invested in the project. Next, we spoke about your project executive, and this is someone who is monitoring your project's performance, both internally and externally. And remember never to forget your project team. They are the people working in the background to make your project a success. Another key element we discussed was our agile and waterfall methodologies, and I've put together a nice summary over here for all of you. The first main difference was that the agile methodology is incremental, and it can go around many times before the completion of the project, and it can change quite a lot during this time. Whereas your waterfall method, on the other hand, is sequential, meaning it must start and end at set points. As a result of the agile methodology's incremental approach, it is also a lot more flexible, meaning that you can make changes throughout the project lifecycle. Your waterfall method, on the other hand, is a lot more rigid. You gather your client requirements at the beginning of this project lifecycle, and you will only show the project output at the end. There will be no interaction with the client throughout this process. The agile method is a collection of many different projects. Essentially, it is broken down into lots of mini projects throughout the lifecycle, whereas your waterfall method uses one completed single project. Anyway, enough about all of this. Let's get started on Lesson 2. Within Lesson 2, we are going to be figuring out how to identify scope. We're going to discuss project goals and objectives. We'll be identifying deliverables and milestones. And then I'll be talking to you all a bit about feasibility studies. Once we're done with that, I'll also teach you how to identify the interest and influence level of your project stakeholders. And then from that, we'll create a stakeholder register. And lastly, I'll be doing a brief introduction to project charters. Let's get started. The initiation phase is the first phase within your project management lifecycle. And within this phase, we need to evaluate things such as scope, and scope being the entire body of work that you need to accomplish in order to finish your project feasibility. Now, feasibility is determining whether it is going to be worth your while to take this project on in the first place. In simpler terms, it can also be what is the likelihood that your project is going to succeed. Another thing you'll need to consider is your project stakeholders. What will you need in order to make your project successful? Is there a specific set of skills that you would need, or an opinion of someone with more industry experience than yourself? Another thing you need to consider is also your project stakeholders. You want people with skills or resources that you don't have available that can add to the overall success of your project. And then from all of this information, you would create your stakeholder register, and this would be for quick reference when dealing with stakeholders so that you can assess their influence and interest within your project. Let's start off talking about scope. Scope is a detailed account of every aspect of the project that needs to be met in order for your project to reach its goals. If we look back at our bridge, the scope was that we needed to build a bridge from scratch and then fit it into cement to create a safe way for hikers to cross the river. I've broken your scope down into these 4 key elements, and the first is to account for all of your project work. Maintaining project scope is also incredibly vital to the success of a project. In a few moments, we'll be discussing scope creep, which is the biggest enemy of all project managers. But when you're determining your scope, it is vital that you use visuals as well, because not all of your stakeholders or team members are experts in every industry. You also need to make sure that within your scope you define your project boundaries, meaning any constraints or limitations within your project. You also need to ensure that you manage your scope incredibly carefully, because remember, scope creep is the enemy. And in the early phases of your project, it is vital that you also obtain sign-off from your client to ensure that everyone clearly understands the totality of the work that you need to complete. Now, when dealing with scope, there are 6 key phases. First, you need to plan your scope. When your stakeholder comes in and says, let's do X, Y, and Z to our project, then you can say, no, that's not within our scope that we've agreed upon. You asked for 5 different web pages and we're expected to deliver just that. Once you've agreed upon your scope, you will then need to control it and ensure that no additions are made or no deviations from the original plan are made. You would then go ahead and collect your requirements, so all the different things that will need to happen in order to make the scope a reality. Then you would have to define your scope, which is what you would need to do in order to create your task list. That would then be turned into your work breakdown structure. Now, work breakdown structures we're going to be dealing with in the next lesson, and this is an incredibly helpful tool within project management that just helps you set out the hierarchy of the tasks that you need to complete, and it also helps you identify any dependencies. And dependencies is something we're going to be discussing a lot throughout this module, and it's when 2 different tasks rely on one another. So if one task needs to be done before the next task can start, as an example. And then lastly, you need to just go ahead and validate your scope as well, to make sure that everyone understands exactly what is going on and what needs to be accomplished throughout the course of your project. Within the context of our website, your planning scope would be identifying what you need to do. So we need to create a website with 5 different pages that our customers can buy shoes on. Controlling it would be making sure that you stay within those key parameters. Collecting your requirements would be setting out all the different things that need to be done in terms of coding and design and all the copywriting, everything that essentially needs to be done. You would then define that. And lastly, you would consult the client as well as your stakeholders to validate the total scope of this work. Now, when talking about scope, we can break this down into 4 key areas. The first being timeline. And your timeline will show how long you have in order to complete this project. The shoe manufacturer has approached you and they've said that they would like you to make them a site on which their customers can purchase their shoes, and that summer is coming up soon, so you'll need to have it done in the next month. They'll need this done as soon as possible, and then they would like to set a timeline for you to complete this project. The next important thing is your project deliverables. And your deliverables are what you're expected to deliver at the end of the day, and this would be your website with 5 different pages that allows customers to purchase shoes. Those would be your key deliverables. Next up, you've got your project milestones. And milestones are very similar to our normal lives. They are key points within the project life cycle or a general life cycle. And examples of different milestones would be having the website designed or having finished coding the website. They're key points within your project that allow you to track your success in terms of keeping to timeline, as well as your project budgets. Another way that you can track your scope is also to use reports where you measure performance against the baselines versus the actual costs and actual timelines within your project. It just allows you to keep a closer eye and make sure that no extra work is creeping in on the sides. So altogether, these 4 elements come together to create scope. Now, what could go wrong if your scope isn't managed? Can anyone remember the term that I used to describe when scope gets out of control? Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk a lot about scope creep throughout this course because it is the enemy to project managers. Now, what scope creep is, it is the uncontrolled growth in a project scope. You've set out your requirements for this e-commerce website, and now your client has come back with tons of new suggestions and tiny little things that will eventually add up and cause you to move into scope creep, which is the top cause of project failure. This is generally going to occur when your project is not accurately defined, If you loosely define what your website needs and what you're needing to build, it is very easy for them to say, but can't you add in this little thing, or can't you make a link to our Facebook page? Tons of little tasks that will add up. And it is very hard to say no when you haven't clearly defined your scope. If your documentation isn't accurate, if you haven't specified exactly what it is that you're going to deliver, there is always room for them to then negotiate and push you into doing additional work that you may not have even charged them for. If you loosely control your scope and it's loosely managed, this can happen when companies have worked together for many years. If you've got a good relationship, you might say, oh, well, it's this person, let's just give him a little bit extra. But each time you do that, it's just going to get worse. And you'll find yourself creeping into scope. For anyone who's still a bit confused, I've made a little visual for you here. So here's an example of controlled scope versus your scope creep. So here everything's perfect and wonderful, and then they start adding things to your list. And as you can see, then your time and your cost go up. And we don't want that, because that means our profits are gone. So we're going to keep that under control. But do you see how quickly all these little tasks build up and eventually they're going to tip the scales? This is a prime example of scope creep. Your budget is not accommodated for this, your timeline has not accommodated for this, and your overall project quality is going to be affected if you let scope creep happen within your project. It may seem very obvious now, but just don't let it happen. Keep an eye on it. But like I said, it is the tiny things that you need to worry about. I know I've said this a lot, guys, but I really don't want any of you to ever fall into this trap. Now that I feel like I've sufficiently scared this whole scope creep concept into all of your minds, let's move on to identifying our different project goals. Do you have something that you're currently working towards? Well, in case some of you are wondering and saying, I'm not actually sure what a goal is or whether this is or isn't a goal, let's just define goals for you. What is the purpose of undertaking your project or your project purpose? Your goal in taking my course would be to become a project manager or to manage your own company more efficiently. That would then be your goal. And it's based on your long-term outcomes. Your long-term outcome in this scenario would be to obtain your professional diploma in project management, or in our scenario, to create the website. That would then include completing the website and all the functionalities so that it can be used as an e-commerce site for our shoe manufacturer. If you're still having any trouble deciding on whether or not something is a goal, here's an easy way you can go about breaking it down. And this is a concept called SMART goals. Firstly, you need to ensure that your goal is specific. In our scenario, we want to create an e-commerce site selling shoes for a local manufacturer. It must then also be measurable. So you need to measure whether or not you have been successful within your project. So for us, for this project to be a success, we must deliver it on time and to the quality that we specified and scope within our project, that we can deliver this to the client, and then we'll know whether or not we've been successful. It must also be attainable, and here you would just evaluate your resources as well as the timeline available to you and decide whether or not you could actually succeed in achieving your project goals. They would need to be realistic, and you would ensure that the website fits in with your company vision and values. You don't want to go and build a website for someone when you don't agree with their cause. Luckily, I don't think many people can have a problem with a shoe manufacturer, but in some cases there could be a conflict of interest there. And then also it must be timely, and we've said here that our site must be ready by the 25th of September. So we would be able to measure our success as the M in SMART goals by whether or not we completed this website by the 25th. If you think you have a goal at the moment, why don't you go and evaluate it and see if you've made a SMART goal. And if not, adjust it so that you have defined success criteria, and then you can decide whether or not you've been successful, or even motivate yourself further. Well, that's enough about SMART goals. Let's talk about identifying different project objectives. Project objectives detail what needs to be achieved in the process of achieving the project goal. That sounds a bit complicated. Let's break this down further. Next up, let's talk about our 5 project objective categories. First, we've got our business objectives, and these are going to relate to solving a problem in the business or even just innovating. If we take the website, for example, this company hasn't had any form of e-commerce. Ordinarily, people would have to physically come into their stores to buy their products, but now they've decided to keep up with trends and build a website, so this would be their business objective. Then we've got their financial objectives, and this would be to hit a certain financial target to save money or even to make more money. In this case, they're wanting to increase their revenue by making online sales as well. Now, in terms of their website, there's not too much that's going to be affected by the regulations, but you just don't want to break the law. But if we're looking at a more international space station scenario, I'm sure there's pretty long conversations going on about different regulations that they all need to follow while undertaking that particular project. Next up, we have our project effectiveness objectives, and this is going to link back to your SMART goals. How effective are the goals that you've set? Is it going to be hard for you to achieve these objectives towards your goal? And is your goal even reasonable? Then you'd have your different performance objectives, and these are going to help you track the progress and provide decent reporting to your manager or other interested parties as to how you are doing performance-wise. And within these objectives, you would make sure that your project is performing adequately in terms of budget, time, and the speed at which everything is being done. Now that we've discussed our 5 project objective categories, let's break it down a step further into our different project deliverables. At this point, you've defined all your project objectives, and you'll now move on to your next phase, which is going to be the deliverables. Project deliverables are a product or service created to meet your project goal. Essentially, what you will deliver at the end of your project. In our case, this will be the website. Your key aspects of deliverables are that it must exist within your project scope. So the website must be the website that you've agreed upon during your planning phase with your clients, and it also must be approved by your stakeholders. Remember, your stakeholders are there for a reason, whether it's the industry experience that they have or even their finances. They are here to help you and to make your project a success. So ensure that your changes to your deliverables or even planning the deliverables in the first place has been approved by your key stakeholders. They are a very valuable resource to your project, and they must be strategically planned. And this is why we are going to be diving so deep into project planning within this course, because without a solid plan, your project is not looking like it's going to succeed. Your project deliverables must be strategically planned, so take time to plan how exactly you plan on delivering these results. Your deliverables have to contribute to the overall success of your project as well, and there's no point in doing something that's going to have no real effect on your project. So always ensure that there is a reason you are doing something. The next thing you need to do is identify your different project milestones. Milestones are the sequence in which your project must be executed. By using milestones to track your project's success, it's going to ensure that vital processes are completed on time. We know that our project needs to be completed on the 25th of September, so there are going to be key points within that process that we need to have a certain task completed before we can move on to new sections. We said with our website that the first thing we'd like to do is successfully design and develop the homepage, and then we'd like to move on to the gallery where the end users could then select the shoes. They would then like to purchase their different shoes, and we'd like to show that the vital processes are accomplished within an allocated time frame. If you give your developers a week to finish the homepage with a milestone in place, you can then go in a week's time and say, guys, what's going on? Have you finished with the homepage? And if not, you can then quickly take corrective action so that it doesn't affect your overall timeline. In actual fact, you should check in before the end of the week and make sure that everything is actually going according to plan. And one of your options in taking this corrective action is also to do a bit of resource planning, which we'll be discussing later on in this module. Project milestones also allow for the progression of a project, and you can monitor it as it moves through each phase. Your milestones are essentially checkpoints within your project. If you are running a race, you know when you get to the 1 mile marker that you've now accomplished 1 mile, and this then allows you to track your process through the whole project and just check that you are on schedule. Another nice way to identify these things is to ask yourself the 4 W's. What, when, who, and why. What are you aiming to do? Why are you trying to accomplish it? Who do you need to be involved? And when does it need to be completed? Are there any other questions you think we should be asking ourselves when managing a project? You can go ahead and type that into Morpheus, and we can see if there's anything we've forgotten. While you do that, I'd like to introduce our next topic, and the next thing we're going to be discussing is our project feasibility. As I said earlier on in the lesson, your feasibility is determining whether or not it is going to be worth your while to take a project on. It's pointless taking on a project that you know you cannot deliver on, or that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. You want to ensure that you are going to be able to succeed in terms of this project. Now, when you're doing a feasibility study, you would need to firstly define what the project is, when you'll need to do it or when it will need to be implemented, why you're taking on the project. Is it only purely for financial gain, or is there some social responsibility as well? How are you planning on achieving your different project goals? And then the best practices that you need to do in order to ensure project success. Now, best practices are the best methods in doing certain tasks. So you need to identify the most effective and efficient ways that you can accomplish tasks, and then they become your best practices. And then you'll lastly have to produce a feasibility report based on all the things you found out during the study. Now, there are different feasibility types. The first is technical, and this is broken down into your labor, transport and shipping, as well as your physical location and different materials. Then we've got economic, and this defines who directly you're wanting to sell your product or service to, and also remember your competitors. It is vital within a project to have a competitive edge. This works both for you and for your customer. And also you just want to make sure that none of your competitors are sneaking up on you. Another thing you'll need to consider is also making sure that you conform with legal requirements and restrictions, and this can include things like copyrights and different permits. Then we've got operational, and this is this project going to be compatible with your business and the different operations that it performs, as well as the working environment. And the last thing is going to be your schedule. Do you have time to actually take this project on? And this would be broken down into your different timelines and milestones within the project. Now, that's quite a bit of information, but guess what? I have a dad joke that's going to help all of you remember this, and it is, tell us if it's feasible. So you've got your technical, your economic, your legal, operational, and your schedule. So tell us. And that is quite a nice, easy way to remember all of your different aspects within your feasibility. The next thing I'd like to talk about is a RAG review. The easiest way to explain this is to do it in the context of a robot or a traffic light. So you've got red, orange, and green. Let's start off with the bad stuff. Now, if something is registered as red in RAG status, this can mean things like your budget's gone over, there's a critical time delay, you've got a lack of available resources, and you've got very unhappy stakeholders. These are things that can cause your project to fail. They are very, very bad. So if we're setting out our feasibility for this website and we've got 50 different things and 20 of them are red RAG statuses, they could cause project failure. Would you then continue with this project? Would it then be feasible for you to invest the time, money, and resources into this project if it is very likely to fail before you've even started? Remember, you're still doing feasibility. You haven't even started yet. So watch out for your red flags or your red RAG statuses. The next thing you've got is also amber, and this is going to be different restrictions on your resources, funds, and time. So these can be resolved if your project manager intervenes in time. So you can manage the dissatisfaction of your stakeholders. You might be able to move things around in the budget or even within the timeline. These are bad, but there is a chance of saving them. Then we've got green. Now everything's calming down. This is when things are going well. You're on target. There's happy stakeholders. There's no resource problems, and you're within budget. So at the feasibility phase, if your project is sitting on mainly green and orange, then I say, obviously it's different for every project, but you're pretty happy at this point. What you need to watch out for is just your red RAG statuses, because that is project failure kind of stuff going on there. So you need to really watch anything that could even be moving from orange into red. So red is bad, green is good. Now, if we wanted to go through a go, no-go review, this is where you're using your RAG status. So let's say we went through our different business objectives and we had a look at our technical review and we said, actually, we don't have the equipment that we need, or our server can't actually host this website. That would then be red and be a big warning sign to us before taking this project on. Then we went and had a look at our economic review, and what we found was that we actually have enough money to run this, and all in all, we have all the resources that we need in order to make this project a success in terms of funding. Our legal review, we were all in the clear. We weren't doing anything illegal or wrong, so we were all clear to move forward in that aspect. Then we looked at our operational review and we thought there are a few little things that might change within our business environment, but nothing that as a team that your team can't handle. Though we're not too worried about that at this point, but we'll be keeping an eye on it. And lastly, we checked our schedule and we are wide open to take this project on. So it's a green for go on your scheduling review. So the only thing we need to watch is our technical review. And if we look down, we've got economic in green, so maybe we can afford to go and upgrade our server. So that's just a quick example of a very easy go, no-go review. I think for now that is enough about feasibility, but we will be picking this up in Module 2. But let's move on to a new subject, and this is going to be identifying your different project stakeholders. Now, how do we go about identifying stakeholders? Now, when identifying your stakeholders, there are a few key questions that you can ask yourself. Firstly, who has the power to make your project succeed or fail? Who is affected positively or negatively by your project? Who makes the decisions about the money? Now, this is one you always have to be very clear on. Every stakeholder thinks they're the most important, so you need to make sure that it's very clear from the get-go who's making any money decisions. Do any of your stakeholders have the potential to solve problems within your project? Maybe you have a technical guru or a finance guru who can come in and save the day if anything goes wrong. You need to identify these stakeholders early on, so you can make use of their skills. Who's in charge of assigning or procuring your different resources or facilities? Which stakeholders can help you get different resources or allow you to use resources of their own? You need to identify them so that you can also make the best use of their resources and facilities in some cases. And who has your specialist skills that are crucial to your project? So if you have an amazing database designer or website designer, you would then want to make sure that that stakeholder is being brought in those aspects of this project. Now, within stakeholders, you have something called an internal stakeholder. And this can be inclusive of your top management, your resourcing directors, and your accounting department. These are key functions within your business, and the people in here will be, like it says, top management. They will be heads of departments, and they will then be able to help you with different resourcing things, like within the resourcing director, about managing your money, and they'll be there to just help guide your project through as other subject matter experts. Along with internal stakeholders, we also have something called an expanded stakeholder. Now, this includes your employees, your vendors, your different customers, your manufacturers, your environmental and community activities, and maintaining strong and consistent communication with all these stakeholders is going to ensure your project success. So your expanded stakeholders are the people involved, but they're not as involved as your top management and resourcing directors. But now that we're talking about stakeholders, how are we going to go about assessing their interest and influence within our projects? Well, let's break this down into 4 categories. So let's map the interest matrix. As you can see now, we've got power and level of interest on our little graph. And we've got 4 sections: minimal effort, keep informed, keep satisfied, and your key players. Let's start off with our high power and high interest stakeholders. So these are going to be your key players. Now, with the key players, you need to engage them regularly and manage them closely. So you can have weekly meetings here to make sure that everyone understands exactly what you're doing, and you can send them regular updates as you working through the project. They're going to be the highest level of effort you're going to put into any stakeholders. You will constantly be engaging with them and asking their opinion. In other words, you'll be working very, very closely with them, which is what makes them the key players. Then we'll move on to our high power and low interest stakeholders. And you're going to keep these stakeholders satisfied, but you're going to keep a balance between keeping them informed and overloading them with information. Here you could have every time a milestone is reached, or if there's a serious incident in the project, you update them, but otherwise you leave them be and only let them know when something significant happens. Then you've got low power and high interest, and you should keep these stakeholders informed and consult with them regarding only their area of knowledge or area of interest. You want to go and ask them if they've spotted any issues within the project, but you want to keep it to their specific area of knowledge. And that's what makes them very valuable in handling the details of your project, because if they're really good at finance, they can help you with working all of that out. Or if they're really good at coding, they can help you code your website. So they're only really worried about their area. Then you've got low power and low interest, and these are your minimal effort stakeholders. So you're only really going to inform them with your general information, like an update email every now and then, and you're not going to overload them with information. They're there in the background, but you don't have to worry about them yet. But do remember that your stakeholders can also move between these. So monitor them, because maybe by the end of your project, they'll actually be key players. So never undervalue a stakeholder. Every stakeholder matters and has influence, and that influence can grow or even lessen throughout the life cycle of your project. Alright, so I spoke to you guys earlier about stakeholder registers. So I made one for all of you so that you can see what it is that I'm actually talking about. So on a minimalist register, you'd have your stakeholder's name, their title if they're within your company, their level of interest, their power or influence, what they require of you, and then what they expect from you because of the requirements. As you can see here, our stakeholder's name is John Doe. He's an internal stakeholder. Which part of the business would he be involved in? If you got a hint there, it's next to it. So he is the CEO, and he has high interest and high influence within our project. And his contribution to the project is his financial expertise, and his concern is going to be our budget. And then we've got his email address there, which is johndoe@madeup.com. Next up, we've got Susan Sunshine, and she is an external stakeholder. Can anyone tell me what she could be within the project? Again, it's over there, but hopefully some of you have put something a bit different. She is the client. Her interest in the project is obviously going to be very high, and her influence is also going to be very high. Her contributions are that she is going to approve our project deliverables. As we finish a page within our website, she will then sign that off and say that she is happy with it, or she'll give us feedback and we'll need to go back and make changes. Her main concern is that we stick to our deadline of the 25th of September, and then we've got her contact details there as well. This is a very basic stakeholder register, but it's quite handy as a quick reference before a meeting or before you're sending out an email, so you know exactly who needs to know what within your project. And last on our list for today, we're going to quickly talk about a project charter. And your project charter is going to define the reason you've undertaken this project, the main stakeholders in your project, the benefits to your company by undertaking it, your different objectives and constraints, some of the risks you've identified, and the general budget of the project. Your project charter is essentially an overview of the project in terms of the positives and the negatives of undertaking it in the first place. This would then be reviewed by your stakeholders as well as your client. Guys, I think I've overloaded you with quite a lot of information today, but let's quickly talk about what's coming up in the next lesson. Within lesson 3, we're going to talk about project planning. So we've moved on into the second phase within our project management lifecycle, and we're going to talk about what happens during the planning phase. We're going to discuss what a project plan is. I'm going to introduce you all to work breakdown structures, which is really cool. I'm really excited for that. And then we'll be talking about how that can be broken down into work packages, summary tasks, and subtasks. But we'll leave that for the next lesson. We learned that project scope is a detailed account of every aspect of the project that needs to be achieved in order to reach your goals. You now know that scope comprises of timeline, deliverables, milestones, and reports. And then we also discovered that a feasibility report defines what the project is, how we plan to implement it, why we've undertaken the project, how we plan to achieve our project goal, and also our feasibility reports. And then lastly, we went and defined our different project stakeholders, and we developed a register acknowledging the power and interest the stakeholders wield. I think we achieved quite a lot today, but I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you for attending lesson